there, my name's Vanilla. No, I don't think Pokemon's graphics are getting worse. Okay, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you again next time. Okay, bye. Wait, you're still here? You want me to actually talk about the graphics? Oh, okay. I guess I can do that if you really want me to. Okay, now for real this time. Hi, everyone. A little while ago, I made a video talking about why I believe there was an issue with jaded Pokemon fans who were angry over the Legends ZA trailer. Some folks took that video as me trying to defend Nintendo or the Pokemon Company. Others believed that I was just talking for the sake of talking, but I was actually saying nothing. Some said that they shouldn't have to care about why the Pokemon games are the way they are and they should just be good and not suck. All that is perfectly valid. Obviously, I made my opinion known and they wanted to share theirs. Someone even called me an arrogant Karen. That actually makes me laugh when I think about it. Like, yep, you take one look at me and it's obvious I'm a Karen right away. That same commenter also said that I was never going to convince anyone of my point. Oh wait, somebody get me their manager. I demand to speak to their manager. Anyway, the point I had made was that Gen 9 Pokemon games aren't perfect, but they're not nearly as bad as some of these folks make them out to be. While I understand and recognize many of the glaring problems with Scarlet and Violet, I still think some folks' reactions were insanely out of pocket. And at the end of the day, you can call me names all you'd like, but all I want to do is point out the good and the bad and explain why I think that. And this type of behavior in the comments is something I see everywhere. It feels like when there's a somewhat popular Switch 2 or Legends ZA post, there's usually a congregation of commenters who are just really angry about Pokemon in general. They'll doom about why the series isn't as good as it used to be, or that fans of the newer generations of Pokemon are destroying both the franchise and video gaming as a whole. I wish I was being hyperbolic. I saw a TikTok where someone asked which game franchise had the worst fan base, and a ton of comments said Pokemon. I get why people may have issues with the games, but I genuinely have no idea where all the hate started. It's like as soon as you say something someone doesn't agree with, they turn into this picture of Gumball and you're questioning their entire existence. Pokemon is really the only game series I play, but you don't see me over here insulting folks who disagree with me. I might call out mean people every now and again, but that's just over their behavior, not their opinion. I make short clips over on TikTok, you should totally go check it out, that talk about some examples of angry and rude posts I find online. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it here because that would be an entirely different video. I saw the Pokemon fandom being split into two sections, old gen and new gen. I think that's a pretty good way to talk about the different kinds of Pokemon fans. You have ones who prefer the old style of games, and then you have fans who are more partial to the newer generations. Now, this is just my opinion, but I think some angry old gens are influenced by their nostalgia for the older games and the art, and it gets in their way of enjoying new generations. I like to say that every time a new Pokemon game comes out, that it's my new favorite. So I'm sure when ZA comes out, I'll be like, oh my gosh, this is my new favorite. I'm just gonna leave that here for future me to come and find for when I make a video on that. Surprise! Hi, future me. So there's nothing wrong with preferences, but when you go as far to say that the games are getting worse and then state an opinion as a fact, I start having some issues. I'm not gonna rehash everything I talked about in my Scarvio video, but I'll link it down below if you're interested. I think that there are a lot of unacceptable performance issues with Scarlet and Violet, and the terrible launch of the games was inexcusable. So let's just get that out of the way now. Even now, I still struggle with odd crashes after terror raids every now and again, where my controls just freeze up on me. No error code, just the game running like normal, except I can't move. So I know there are many issues with Scarlet and Violet, but yet they're still my favorite Pokemon games. And so you may say, Scarlet and Violet are my least favorite Pokemon games, and that's totally cool. I'm sure I find your favorite Pokemon game just as fun as Scarlet and Violet is to me. But when folks say things like,
we are sick of every Pokemon game being the same with useless graphic like the PS2,
that's when I pick up my awful comment bag and start stuffing it full of screenshots. All the comments I've seen recently are directly related to Gen 9 and are found on posts that either talk about Scarlet and Violet or Legends ZA. So that's the generation I'm going to be talking about for this video. Now, to go back to this amazing work of art, Gen 9 games have PS2 graphics. I haven't booted up my PS2 in a while, so it has been a bit since.
Legends ZA looks like a PS1 game. Are they sure they're using the right dev tools?
Wait, hold on. We're going back to the PS1? Oh, okay. Couldn't even let me finish my thought, huh? Let me get this right. Legends ZA, Arceus, and Scarlet and Violet look like PS1 games? The PS1, a console from 1994 using hardware that was built on architecture from the late 1980s? You know what? Never mind. Here's one that talks about the N64.
These graphic comparisons between Pokemon from 1999 to 2022 shows how lazy Game Freak is as a developer. Pokemon games haven't been good in a long time.
This one here tries to show how Scarlet and Violet looks worse than Pokemon Snap for the N64. Now that's something I can work with. It just so happens with the help of tools created by folks who are so smart they make me look like a single-celled organism, we can actually look at the 3D assets from Pokemon Snap. And that's exactly what I'm gonna do, because I'm not gonna sit here and pretend this cherry-picked screenshot of Scarlet and Violet looks like, if not worse, than Pokemon Snap, which is for the N64, which was released almost 30 years ago. So I grabbed some of the river level and put it into Blender. I think it's important to note that the scenes from Snap are extremely simple, which isn't a bad thing. Snap has its own unique style, and I think it looks really good for what it is. But to say that the current generation of games is going backwards graphically, and then comparing it to games like Pokemon Snap, that's the only reason I'm comparing the two, because I personally don't think they're even remotely similar to one another. I guess some folks would probably say, well, they're not actually comparing the two, you're missing the point. If you're not comparing the two and using the older generation to rag on the new generation, what's the point? I don't get it. I don't think this is the exact scene from that X post, but I managed to capture a similar angle on a waterfall. The first thing I noticed between these two photos is the quality of the texture. I actually think how I have it in here in Blender is a better image quality, but whatever. This water texture we're looking at from the N64 has a resolution of 64 by 64. A lot of the textures as far as I've seen in Scarlet and Violet are around 1024 by 1024, which would make them HD. I even went as far as recreating the infamous Scarlet and Violet screenshot, and I don't know about you, but it looks even more goofy when you're not trying to cherry pick pictures to make your point seem valid. We also need to note the complexity of the mesh as well. Again, this doesn't feel fair, but I'm not the one making the comparison. The entire river scene I have here, which isn't really the whole level, has around 5,400 triangles if we round up. Jacques' model alone has 16,000 triangles. So this entire model is almost 3 times as complex as the N64 scene. Scarlet and Violet's environment design leaves a bit to be desired in my opinion, but that doesn't mean that graphically the N64 is superior. You can have your own personal opinion on which style looks better to you, but there are insanely obvious improvements that this post is overlooking just to make a statement. So that takes care of the N64 comparison, but unfortunately that's not where these comparisons end.
We got proper full 3D Pokemon games ages ago, with Colosseum and XD Gale of Darkness, yet newer games can't touch the level of animation quality those games had 20 years later.
Now we're on to the GameCube. Okay, at least we're moving forward a bit. I was unable to figure out how to rip GameCube assets myself. Once the tutorial started talking about hex editing, my brain shut off. So we'll just compare the Pokemon here. This is Eevee and Gale of Darkness, and then Eevee and Scarlet and Violet. Again, it doesn't feel right to put these two models next to each other. Don't get me wrong, they're both adorable, but I don't understand how you can say there's a huge drop in animation quality between these two models. Maybe this commenter hasn't played any Pokemon games since 2005. That's okay, but there's no way this little Eevee has even close to the same animation capability of the new Scarlet and Violet model. This is just objectively speaking. I don't have an armature here to compare it to since this is just the mesh, but I can tell you just by looking at what I'm showing you here that the GameCube model isn't capable of recreating the same level of animation as the Scarlet and Violet models. When the post says animation quality, from the bit of Gale of Darkness I've played and seen, I think they mean the variation in movements and the range of motion. Objectively speaking, the Scarlet and Violet Eevee model is just as capable of mimicking GameCube Eevee's movements, but the same can't be said for the little GameCube Eevee. It's not even, again, like, why are we even comparing? This isn't a fair comparison. While you may have a visual preference, that doesn't mean it's objectively true that the newer models and graphics are getting worse. The difference between these Eevee models is really obvious, especially when you put them next to each other. GameCube Eevee doesn't have its own eyelids that can blink or a little mouth that can open and close. All of that work is done using textures. You can see here the different eyes where the blinking is simulated by blending between the different positions on the texture. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but it gets old when these folks just keep saying the same things over and over again. You can totally say you prefer the old style of graphics and animations, and I'm here for that, but to say that they're not touching the same level of animation quality is extremely biased and just factually incorrect. For a while, the Pokemon models were kept relatively similar from the 3DS through a good part of the Switch's lifespan. To me, it makes sense since Pokemon are Pokemon, and there's really no need to drastically change how a Pokemon looks unless you change the style of the games. And honestly, while the environment and story changed throughout the years, Pokemon stayed pretty similar in terms of stylistic direction. There was obviously the swap from 2D to 3D with X and Y, and I would say the next big shift was actually with Scarlet and Violet and Legends of Arceus. And since Legend of Arceus was Pokemon's first steps into an open world environment, a lot of changes came with it. Now, instead of being able to use smoke and mirrors to disguise flaws in the model's movement by having a fixed point of view in battle, animations had to look good to accommodate a 360-degree dynamic camera. I don't want to ruin the magic for you, but if you don't know this already, in 3D animation, the way a model looks as it moves only matters from the perspective of the camera. camera. So while a model may look perfect at an angle you're seeing it from, there's a possibility it doesn't look great from the opposite angle. Pokemon models in Gen 9 have rigged eyes and mouths that most Pokemon did not have up until this point. Like we discussed earlier, most models were only using textures to simulate mouth and eye movements, but now all of the Pokemon in these games were having their expressiveness expanded upon. Even if we just watch Eevee's armature, we can see how fluid the movements are. The way the bones move is so detailed, you can even see it breathing. Gen 9's approach to Pokemon models was to make them look more realistic and move away from a cartoon-like animation style. Again, you can have a preference, but it's a hard task for any company to make fictional characters that don't actually exist in reality look realistic. Objectively speaking, a lot of work had to be put into these models to make them move like this. Whether or not you think they're expressive enough doesn't change that fact. Obviously, you can tell I really enjoy 3D modeling, so I've spent quite a bit of time on it. I've also brought up textures a couple of times now, and there's something that I want to mention. I think the textures in Scarlet and Violet and Legend of Arceus look okay on their own. I have used a texture enhancement mod for Legend of Arceus that scales up the textures, and I think they look better that way. I do have to say that the technique used to texture the environments in Gen 9 does leave a bit to be desired. While I talked about the infamous Scarvio picture, the tiling of the mountain in the back is pretty obvious. Even if you don't know what to look for, your eyes automatically notice patterns, so it does stand out. The textures on the ground can also be a bit muddy, and I do wish there was a little bit more detail. I'm not entirely sure why some of the textures look blurry even up close, like this one on the wall here. The tiling you see on the mountain is a technique used to lower demand on the hardware, and it's done in other games as well. Ideally, the transition between tiling at a distance and up close wouldn't be too dramatic, but it does really stand out quite a bit sometimes. If I had to make a prediction, performance optimizing techniques like this will be altered when Scarlet and Violet gets its free upgrade for the Switch 2. And I'll be covering that soon after the launch of the Switch 2, so keep an eye out for that. This video has been a lot of me trying to counter the argument that Pokemon's graphics aren't as bad as the loud critics on the internet seem to think they are. And honestly, if it wasn't for these folks, I wouldn't even have a reason to talk about any of this. It is very hard for me to sit and continually read the same misinformed and misguided talking points that are so easily disprovable, but I'm sure at this point most of those folks are gone from this video. Actually, as soon as I said I don't think the graphics are getting worse at the beginning, they probably clicked off. Opinions are not facts, and I've really tried my best to not share my opinions as fact. There is objective evidence that Pokemon's graphics aren't getting worse and are continually improving. Whether or not folks think that the improvement is fast enough or to the degree that they think it should be done is a different story. That's subjective. I personally sit in the camp that the major issue for Pokemon and Game Freak at this point is the hardware they're working with. I don't know why they created a game like Scarlet and Violet that has obvious performance issues. It seems to me like the game was originally supposed to be for the Switch 2, or at minimum a console that has more resources to work with. I don't think it's because they're incompetent or lazy. The quality of what I've shown you here is actually proof of the opposite. However, the decisions they made during the game's development are definitely questionable, and the amount of time that they have to work on each project is probably a contributing factor as well. I'd like to know why they made some of the decisions they did, but I don't think we'll get any answers about that anytime soon. I guess I just want to finish this video off by saying that I think there is valid criticism for the Pokemon games released on the Switch, and more specifically Gen 9, but I think someone needed to put something out there that addresses these baseless and repetitive claims about the graphics of these games, and I have no problem being the one to do that. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't dropped a like and subscribed already, if you could do that, that would be amazing. If you want to see more of my content, I am active on Blue Sky, and I recently started on TikTok as well. I'll leave a link to all my socials down below if you're interested. Now go have an amazing day, and I'll see you again next time. Okay, bye!